Hello everybody, welcome to yet another exciting installment of our Crushpad Winemaker Minutes. And in this installment, I'm going to be talking about destemming and why do wineries or winemakers destem their fruit. Whether it's white wine or red wine, there is a reasoning for destemming. And what the basic notion of destemming is that actually taking the berries and separating them from the stems. Now there's plenty of different wines that are made here at Crushpad, from Cabernet to Pinot to Syrah, as well as white wines like Chardonnay and Sauvignon Blanc and even some Viognier. And just to get the white wine out of the way, the majority of the fruit that we process in Crushpad is actually whole cluster pressed. So the stems are actually included in the press while we do the squeezing, because those stems actually serve as a filter to be able to get clearer juice into the tank for settling. But if anybody was to do any kind of skin contact for their white wines, that's where they would do some destemming, or entirely a full amount of destemming, 100% destemming. Now, how much destemming would we do for a red wine? Let's say we were making a very aggressive, ripe Cabernet and wanted to express quite a bit of tannins. Now, keep in mind that Cabernet is actually quite tannic as a variety in terms of the amount of tannins that are in the skins as well as in the seeds, particularly if we're dealing with very ripe seeds. So there's really no need for any stem inclusion in the fermenting bin. What stem inclusion would do to any wine that has stems in it is actually impart additional tannin structure to the wine, which gives it a backbone in the finish and gives it that kind of tightness that you find in younger wines. So as I mentioned, with Cabernet, why have even more tannins that you need to eventually take out? So for the most part, as Cabernet winemakers, we tend to completely destem the fruit. Now we get to a variety like Pinot or Syrah or maybe even Zinfandel. And a lot of times there's not a lot of natural tannins in the skins. In Pinot, it's a very thin-skinned variety to begin with, so not a lot of phenolics there. And with Syrah, it's usually more fruit-driven as opposed to actual tannins that are available in the skins. But in the seeds, as well as in the stems, quite a bit of tannins can be found there, and we can find our way into including a percentage of stems in there. Question is, how much stems should we include in the bins? And that really is related to the level of tannin structure a particular winemaker wants to put in their wine, and also, quite importantly, how ripe are the stems. If we're dealing with a vintage or a year where the fruit doesn't ripen all the way through and we have to pick due to some rain that's maybe hitting the vineyard, or we have reached optimal flavor development, but the seeds and the stems still haven't reached full lignification, which actually means browning of the seeds and the stems, and kind of a slight wood layering. That's what lignification means. And what then would happen in those vintages where there isn't proper lignification, if you include those stems in there, you would impart harsher, more bitter and green type tannins. So we do look for very closely when the fruit comes into the winery to monitor those stems to make sure that we have proper ripeness before any kind of inclusion is put in there. And for anybody who's interested in additional flavor and aromatic developments in their wines, particularly in Syrah and Zinfandel, by putting ripe stems in there, you do get that spicy, nutty, to some extent sometimes even a little bit of a underwood character that shows through in the wine. That gives the wine an extra layer of complexity, gives it a little bit more focus, and of course with the additional tannin component in there, you actually get a much sturdier and much more age-worthy wine.